Just to recap that so that our audience can fully appreciate I'm still trying to fully appreciate how beautiful that is. A guy who helped design one of the most successful video games ever, Halo, right? A series, went to a Trappist monastery, prayed, asked for God's divine will, came back, began a Bible study at, again, one of the leading video game design companies who had one of the most successful games, and was able to live his Christian faith amidst that context. I mean, that's not, I think, what pops into people's minds when they think video game designer.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of this conversation on video games and evangelization. I'm Bobby Angel, fellow at the Word on Fire Institute, and with me is Father Blake Britton, a priest of the Diocese of Orlando. Father Blake, how you doing?
Doing very well. Excited to be here.
So the next episode here in our conversation series, we're actually going to be interviewing a video game designer, a young man who's worked on a number of different games, including a small game named Halo. Maybe you've heard of it. Is also a faithful young man. I want to welcome to the show Paul Ehreth. Paul, welcome.
Hi guys, thanks so much for having me here. It's going to be awesome to talk about all these really cool and important things.
Paul, first of all, what's the first video game you ever played?
I think the very first game I ever played was Centipede on the first Atari system. My older brother Dan brought it home for us, and we turned all the lights off and cranked the sound up, and that really kind of was an event that pretty much set all these other events into motion.
Wow, Centipede. Now that you're like one of the original gamers. That's awesome, man.
I just dated myself completely. You said young man. That was rather generous, I think.
Geriatric man.
Yeah, that's right.
And what did that, you said that really solidified something inside your heart. Like, what did that do to solidify your career of video games and sort of launch you in this direction?
It was just such a powerful experience. I wanted to understand what is this thing, that is so kind of magical. Entertainment has always kind of had that impact on me, where I wanted to understand it from both kind of the technical side and also the emotional side. And video games to me have always been kind of the perfect marriage of those two things. And so it just ended up being the perfect fit for me.
Let's stay with that actually. In terms of then wanting to take that to the next level of actually designing and working with this, can you tell us about your trajectory within like making this into a career?
Absolutely. So the weirdest thing to me about video games is that people can come into the industry from so many different pathways. I've worked with people that had doctorates in biochemistry that ended up becoming level designers on different games that I've worked on. People come from, traditional art backgrounds or writing, composition of music. With me, it was kind of a weird mix of trying to understand the mechanics. So I would experiment a lot with different games on my computer. I would break my dad's computer all the time, which probably drove him nuts, but I just wanted to understand how all these things worked. And so modding of games, I don't know if you've heard about the modding scene, but that was kind of my intro into actual game design. When Half-Life 1 came out and before it, the Quake games and Doom, they often came with their own level editors. So I would just open those level editors and I would start messing around, and I had no idea what I was doing. And so that led to some really interesting results. And eventually I made my own full mod. I teamed up with a programmer that I met online through one of the forums, and we ended up just kind of coming up with this really cool game concept and released it. And it became kind of surprisingly popular. I think it got around 80,000 downloads. And at that time, that was like, we were getting fan mail, and so it was like going from I have no idea how games are made to stumbling our way through to this little tiny mod into, like, wow, we actually made a game that people really enjoy playing. And so that was kind of the first experience where I thought this could actually be a thing.
Wow. And then at that time, there wasn't necessarily a video game like fine arts degree.
So yeah, that's a good point. So at that time, there were no game design schools. There were programming schools, and there were some very few 3D art schools that were starting up. And so my choices were basically like I wanted to either join the military or I was going to try to actually make a career out of video games. And through the guidance of the Holy Spirit, I ended up choosing this digital art school that was just north of Seattle, about an hour north, called Henry Cogswell College. They now exist in California as Cogswell Polytechnic, and they taught a degree in digital art. And so that was kind of my first intro into the 3D modeling and animation. They taught traditional 3D modeling and animation like in the Pixar films. And so that was another potential avenue, because I loved, movie directing and writing little screenplays. And so that I thought could also be an opportunity. But in the end, my heart was really kind of pulled back into video games.
That's great. And that kind of led you around the world, right? I mean, I know you got involved in like a Hollywood movie briefly to do some rendering, but then again, video games were calling, and so you went back to Seattle, and then you've kind of been around the world following this trajectory.
Yeah, that's right. I worked on some very small game projects in Seattle, but they were very, very small. And so my first kind of like career breakthrough was actually being hired onto this movie in San Clemente, California, called The Barnyard. And it was a 3D animated feature film from Paramount Pictures and Nickelodeon Films, and it was geared more towards families, and it gave me an opportunity to actually kind of practice some of my 3D modeling and technical art skills. And so that was really kind of my first foot in the door where I was actually kind of getting paid for the first time, which is really nice. I remember before that I was working at this really small video game studio, and they basically weren't paying me. I was an unpaid intern at that time, and so I had to kind of choose between paying for gas to drive to the studio each day or paying for lunch. And that was not a real fun time when you have to make those decisions. And so I kept praying a lot about it, and one day I got a phone call, and the guy didn't really introduce himself. He just said, "Hey, is this Paul?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "What do you do right now for work?" And I said, "Well, I'm kind of working at this small game studio here in Bellevue, Washington." And I'll never forget this. He said, "How would you like to be doing something better?" And so the next week, they had me on a plane down to LA, and the rest was kind of history for that. But after that,
that's how the Lord got me into seminary. It's like, what are you doing with your life? How would you like to do something better? Yeah, okay, I'll join the priesthood. Yeah.
That's right.
But that's beautiful, man, how the Lord was able to inspire that and just bring that connection about.
Absolutely. It's strange to me. Whenever things kind of get a little bit dark, there's always kind of that light that clicks on that's like, let's go this direction now, or, now things are getting a little bit dark again. Let's go this direction. So it always feels like that power of the Holy Spirit is always kind of pulling me back onto this path of, keeping things together.
Yeah, and so you went back to Seattle after that little kind of Hollywood moment, and then got involved with Microsoft.
Absolutely. So, it was interesting because that was a very big crossroads for me. And I remember praying a novena for guidance because I really just felt like I was kind of losing my soul a little bit in that Hollywood environment. It's kind of very true what a lot of people say about that, and it's very easy to kind of lose yourself and your soul in that environment because there's so much money and so much materialism. And I kind of felt that I was kind of unhappy. So I prayed a lot for guidance and direction. And after this novena, suddenly I felt the desire to just pack everything up in my car and with no plans, just drive back to Seattle. And so I did that, and I kind of came back home and was just thinking maybe something will work out, and something did. I pretty quickly I got a job interview at a studio at Microsoft called FASA Studio, which is famous for making Mech Warrior, Mech Assault, Crimson Skies, a lot of really cool games for Xbox. And so they hired me to work on this game. It was a first-person shooter called Shadowrun for the Xbox 360, which was kind of like Counter-Strike, but with magic and tech upgrades between each round. And so that was where I kind of got the chance to transition from 3D art back into game design, which again is what I felt my heart was pulling me into. So I kind of did both some 3D art and tech art, and also designed several of the levels for that game, which was really, really a cool experience.
And eventually you got involved with a game called Halo.
Yeah, through a crazy series of events, some more, I think it's important to talk sometimes about, sometimes we have to go through dark times before we, get to these places where we improve. And I think that God uses those difficult times to strengthen us and to teach us things and to help us be humble. And so I went through some really difficult times between, working on Shadowrun at Microsoft, and I worked at Sony for 2 years on a game that never came out. And so I really felt like I wasted 2 years of my life, crunching like crazy on this game, and it ended up not coming out. And then the industry kind of crashed for a while there, where I didn't have a job for a good 7 months, and I interviewed at probably about 50 different studios, including some internationally, because I was so desperate to, get a job somewhere. And I spent a lot of time in prayer at that point too. It was weird. Not to like get off on this tangent, but there was one moment where I had this dream about building a shrine to Mary, and I had like the plan in my head. And so I just woke up that morning and I went to the hardware store and I started building this wooden case, and I don't, suddenly I knew the measurements. I have no idea why. And then I ended up going to this hardware store to get all the supplies, and they were able to cut the boards, and they offered to do it for free. And then I went to this garden store and I found a statue of Mary that happened to fit it perfectly. And I went out, I just kept going, and I went to this park into the woods and just found a quiet place, and I kind of placed it there and spent a good amount of time in prayer for guidance and direction again. Got some flowers that went with it. It was very beautiful. And after that moment, I kind of got this peace in my heart that, be patient, and I'm setting things up for you. And after that was when things really kind of broke open again, and I got a job at Microsoft Research working on the technology that ended up becoming the Kinect technology, which is now HoloLens technology. And I got to work on the first Kinect game called Kinect Adventures, where you get to go down the river raft and all that kind of fun stuff. And then after that, I was invited to work on Halo as a level designer, a mission designer, and that was, honestly, you guys, was my dream project. Like Halo 1 was one of those games that just changed my life. The concepts of exploration and this kind of feeling of much more openness and the real adventure and the mix of that story with the gameplay was so cool. And so that was my dream project, was to work on Halo.
Well, on behalf of millions of gamers, including myself, thank you. Because Halo remains, in my opinion, one of those landmark games in the industry. It really, it charted, especially the first-person shooter and this sort of open-world concept in gaming, in a very different direction. That's still the standard till this day. That it will remain one of those games that sort of revolutionized the future of gaming. So it's amazing to think that a man of your caliber of faith was involved in a project that was so landmark in the industry, and how it really was the Holy Spirit that led you to be involved in this project. And that's something I don't think most people would think about when they contemplate video game design, how the Lord was actually working in your own life,
Yeah, we're here. Entertainment in general tends to be a certain type of environment, let's say, and it doesn't always cater to people of different faiths. And so a lot of us kind of tend to keep our faith a little bit close to the vest. And it's interesting. I've been trying to find ways, because there's always this balance between you really don't want to push your faith on someone else. If you want God to call them and to just present this beautiful truth to them and let them, kind of be able to choose it for themselves. And so I really do try hard not to kind of force the faith onto other people, and just to kind of present that truth, with joy and humility. And hope that people, will kind of see the beauty in it. And so we are here. I think we tend to be a little bit more muted about how we live our faith.
Paul, would you mind sharing a bit of your own testimony? Were you always like on the path of Catholicism? Did you leave and come back? What was that journey for you?
That's a really good question. Yes and no. I come from a kind of I definitely grew up in a very Catholic family. My mom and dad both are very devoutly Catholic, but at some point around high school, towards the end of high school and the beginning of college, I felt like it wasn't really mine, that I was just going through the motions, that I was just saying the prayers because that's what they did, and it's not because it's what I really believed in my heart. And so I went through, I felt like I wanted to explore things. I wanted to understand what else there is out there. I wanted to seek what I found out later was truth. And so I studied a whole lot of different religions, I got actually really fascinated by Rastafarianism at one point, and just bizarre things, because I was trying to find, well, like, is this true, or what is true about these things? And I spent a lot of time going to different Protestant churches, because all of my friends who were Christian were very, Protestant, and we're all about the music and the kind of energy that was in the Protestant churches at that time. And so I would go to all these different churches, and the thing that I noticed is that it seemed like there were elements of truth in each of these different faiths, in these different religions and these different Protestant churches, but they didn't all agree with each other. And that became this problem in the back of my mind that I couldn't get rid of. And I kept saying to myself, well, if this pastor is saying this, but this other pastor is saying this, they can't both be right. This is a fundamental conflict, and we can't, there can't be a paradox or disunity in truth. It has to be, a singularity, if you will. And so I kept searching. At that point, I was thinking, well, all these things about Christianity make a lot of sense. This concept of God being love, and what is actual love? What does the actual love look like? And it looks like Jesus on the cross, right? And so most other religions didn't really have that part of it, so I could kind of get rid of a lot of the other religions right off the bat. And then when it came to like the differences between these different Christian churches, I started reading earlier and earlier documents from the earliest church fathers, because I figured, well, at some point, somebody at the very beginning had to know how we were supposed to understand these things and would teach it. And so I started reading a lot of the early church fathers, especially Aquinas. I got really deeply into Aquinas. I'm not sure which came first, if it was Robert Barron watching his videos or Aquinas first, but I got into watching and reading about both of them around the same time. And that is kind of what led me back to the Roman Catholic Church. And I just can't deny it. The more I challenged it, the more I would, have issues with it and would truly challenge it, the more it showed itself to be true, and there were answers that would come back that made a lot of sense. So here I am.
It's like a Word on Fire success story.
Yeah.
But again,
seriously.
the beauty of like wanting to challenge and ask questions and argue and dialogue, it's not just you shut off reason, you shut off questions. It's a process of exploration and quest.
Yeah, and it's fascinating to me that you found that dynamism and that drama, which we've spoken about in other episodes, within the church fathers too, that seed of the initial Catholic faith. I always tell people, especially those who are my Protestant friends, once you start reading the church fathers, it's all over.
Watch out.
Watch out. Catholicism's right around the corner, because these initial men and women of the church, they really did exactly what you did. I mean, they were of Greek or Roman origin, or they were some Middle Eastern origin, and they suffered and struggled through thinking with the faith. And that's the beauty of Catholicism in the end, and that's why there's so much wisdom to be wrought in our religion. And so it's just amazing to hear that all these thousands of years later, here you are, and that wisdom of the church is even touched into the video game industry, into your own profession and your own testimony of Christ.
Oh, absolutely. And it's a really good point to bring up, that, we challenge these things. Mary asked, how can this be? And I bring this concept very, very deeply into the design culture at every studio that I work at. I always try to, and I talk to the leadership about why I feel this is so important as well, that we open ourselves up constantly at all times to challenge, and that we respond to that challenge. Otherwise, we can't start sweeping things under the rug and saying, oh, we'll figure that out later, or that's not a problem. We have to address these things and respond like, how is this going to be different for us? How are we going to fix these things? Why is it going to work? And so with everyone that I work with, I always say, like, please challenge this. Like, I'm going to present this concept, but please challenge it. And that's how we make something better. The truth will come out of it, and we'll push and pull it, along that pathway. But that's how we get the best possible results, is through challenging and being open to challenge and truly wanting it to be better.
Okay, and I'm sure your faith as well has helped sustain you in an industry that there's a high burnout rate. Like, it's intense work, and you're staring at a screen for a long amount of time, and it takes a toll. And for you to still be at it, I think it's about 20 years, right? You're still in the industry.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, if I look at an email, for 2 or 3 minutes, I'm already like, okay, I'm done with emails for a little bit. Time to take a walk, So I can only imagine, for so many years in this industry, it's amazing. How did your faith correlate with that?
It's a good question. I think that God makes a beautiful variety of people that all serve different purposes. The hands and feet of Christ. We are all of these different parts of the mystical body of Christ. And I'm just one of those, and so I'm never going to tell you, like, my way is the best way. I'm simply, the left toe here. There's a lot of other people that are doing much more important things than I'm doing. But I think that I jokingly would always tell my mom, they love working out in the yard, and I would always kind of tell her, like, I don't think God made me for manual labor, right? It's always just kind of like the joke, like, you guys have fun out in the yard. I am going to be on the computer screwing around, and I will do that for 24 hours a day, just because I feel like that's, kind of what I was made for. You had a better question here, though. Could you maybe repeat that question one more time for me?
Just in how, again, an industry with so much burnout, you're still at it.
Yes. So I read one time there was a statistic that said that the vast majority of people in the game industry don't last more than 5 years. And there are so many times where I wanted to quit. Like, literally, so I'll tell you one quick story, which I think is a really important point to illustrate this, which is at the end of Halo 4, again, this being my absolute dream project, the game comes out, we're getting good reviews, it's selling like gangbusters. I think it ended up selling something like 9 million copies on one platform. And that's really good. And so this was my dream project. It was massively successful. I was utterly miserable. I would go home and I felt completely empty inside. And I would just say, is this it? Is this like there's got to be something more than this? And I'm kind of reminded of I think it was Augustine, who said, our hearts are always restless until they rest in you, O Lord. And that was hitting me harder than anything, where I was always chasing these accolades and these accomplishments and work. But ultimately, I just kind of felt empty afterwards. And so after Halo 4, when I was kind of just sitting in this misery, I talked to Father Frank Schuster of St. Teresa of Calcutta Parish in Woodinville, which was my home parish at the time. And he recommended that I go on a, what do you call it, a kind of a sabbatical, to kind of take a break from things. And he recommended that I go to this Trappist monastery that's in Oregon in the mountains. And so I just packed a backpack in my car and drove the 4 hours south to this monastery, and I stayed there with the monks for several days. And I lived basically as they lived. I would wake up at 4 in the morning, and you would it was pitch black outside. It was freezing cold because it was just after New Year's, and you do lauds and compline and vespers with them. You pray with them in the church, in the chapel there, and there's no cell phone signal, so no electronics at all. And it's up in the mountains, beautiful nature, and it was the most at peace I think I've ever been. And so I spent this whole time in prayer and asking for guidance and direction, because I just kind of didn't want to do it anymore. I kept saying, you know what, I'll do anything you want me to do. If you want me to be a teacher in Uganda, I will go and be a teacher in Uganda, but you have to set my heart on fire for that. Otherwise, I'm not just going to randomly move somewhere. And so I kept praying for this. And, if you want me to be a monk, I'll devote my life to prayer. And I'll live with these monks. I'm perfectly at peace right now. And the answer, much to my chagrin, kind of came back, no, this isn't what I have planned for you. Go back. And I remember being really frustrated with this answer, because I didn't want to go back. And so I packed everything back in my car, and I was driving back home. And on the drive back home, I felt this idea kind of pop into my mind, which was to talk to my other 2 Christian friends that I knew of at the studio and to start a fellowship with them. And so I immediately started getting excited about this idea. And so I went back and I talked to them about it. And I said, guys, what if we started a morning fellowship like once a month, and we'll have a place where we can openly talk about our faith. And they loved the idea. And so we kind of started this morning Christian fellowship group. It was non-denominational. And it's interesting how I didn't know about any other Christians at the studio at that time. And we couldn't really broadcast it because, I didn't want to mix, religion and the workplace and that type of thing. And yet somehow people kept kind of hearing about this. And I'll never forget this one time, this big burly guy who worked on, I think he was working on Master Chief's armor and one of the vehicles at the time. He a really good, nice guy. And he came up to me and he's like, hey, can I talk to you for a minute in private? And I was like, sure, what's going on? I thought he wanted to talk to me about something that was wrong in one of my missions. And he just got real close. He said, I've heard that you've started like a Christian fellowship Bible thing. Is that true? And I said, yeah. And he said, can I join? And it was crazy, like how the numbers like kept growing and growing until I think we had around 10 or 12 people meeting once a month in the morning before work over breakfast, and we would just share in our faith and fellowship together. And that was so much more fulfilling than working on this project that was my dream project to work on. And since then, I've tried to keep that always in mind, that it's the things of this earth are never really going to give us fulfillment. Doing the will of God is really what provides that.
Yeah. I mean, just to recap.
That was beautiful.
Yeah, that was awesome. I mean, just to recap that so that our audience can fully appreciate I'm still trying to fully appreciate how beautiful that is. A guy who helped design one of the most successful video games ever, Halo, right? A series, went to a Trappist monastery, prayed, asked for God's divine will, came back, began a Bible study at, again, one of the leading video game design companies who had one of the most successful games, and was able to live his Christian faith amidst that context. I mean, that's not, I think, what pops into people's minds when they think video game designer. And yet, this is what's present right now in the industry, and it just goes to show, once again, the point that we've been reiterating over and over again, there's a desperate need, I think, for evangelization, for catechesis and formation within this industry, and that the church can provide in that area. Do you agree? Do you think that's something that's very much needed in this industry at the time?
Absolutely. I mean, I feel like we all kind of have this, our souls are thirsting for God. They're sick in a way, and God is the only one that can provide that healing. And so I think that when we are the hands and feet of Christ, it is up to us to find the ways to reach out to others, to help them, to love them wherever they're at, to love them, and to try to provide healing and that love of God for them.
Yeah.
I think too of like Tom Brady, like 3 Super Bowl rings ago, he did some interview with 60 Minutes, and he shared like he wakes up sometimes like, is this it?
Yeah.
There's got to be something more.
Yeah.
And I mean, Michael Phelps has gone through the same thing after he won his first round of like 5 medals. again, kind of spiraled into drug use and depression, almost suicidal. And it's like, you are at the top of your game, whether that's athletics, whether that's accolades, whether that's, again, an industry you love, the dream project you're on, and you get there and you're like, this isn't enough. Right. This isn't enough for our restless hearts.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that reminds me of, we had a monk one time come to the seminary, and he gave a wonderful, talk, just sort of monasticism, what have you. But then at the end of the talk, one of the seminarians had the audacity to ask him, aren't you happy that you're not in the monastery right now and you're here, sort of having a beer with us and hanging out? And the monk's response, I'll never forget, he said, I cannot wait to get back to my monastery. And we asked him why, and he said, the life that you live out here is very stimulating, but it's not satisfying.
Yes.
And there's a difference between stimulation and satisfaction. And I feel like that's what you found in your own life, is like your stimulation was, on as high as it could possibly be. I mean, you had reached the pinnacle and really the idea of anyone who would be associated with video game design. But yet the satisfaction wasn't there because it was missing that facet of religiosity. But you were able to find that, as a co-op with both your profession. And I think it's so beautiful how Christ did not call you away from your profession, but he called you deeper into it and to be a disciple within that industry. And that's another point that we've been making over and over again in this series is the solution is not to demonize video games and not to artificially sort of laud them up as if this is, another idol. It's finding that balance between the fact that Christ is in all things in all places. We're to find him where he is, and we're to show his love in whatever capacity we can in the situation in which we find ourselves. And that's most certainly what you did. I mean, it's really noteworthy, what you accomplished in that regards and what Christ was able to do with you.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've often been on projects. I always try to be on projects that don't cross certain lines, just out of a desire to not add to the worsening of the culture or society. And of course, it's a very blurry line. It's always been difficult. Do I work on this game that has, foul language, and how much foul language is okay? And there have been times where there have been certain lines where I really wanted to work against, kind of some of the content that they wanted to put in some of the games. And the question came up in my mind of, is it, I guess I kind of reached this point where I thought to myself, well, even if something is like pretty bad content, if I can pull it a little bit, even a little bit towards more goodness, then that was worth the time and the effort. And so I guess I have stopped looking at things in such black and white terms about like, is this offensive content? And it's more about, can I pull this into like a healthier, happier place, a better place? And that has really helped kind of quell the anxiety that I get about, oh no, we're putting this or that in the game now. What am I going to do? It just gives a new opportunity for me to kind of try to be that light and say, hey guys, what if we changed it in this way? Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't, but it's really more about like keep gently pulling in that direction, and that I think is kind of the healthy response no matter where something is in terms of its content.
Paul, do you mind sharing a couple quick examples of when the Holy Spirit's nudged you towards like voicing that, like not imposing, but proposing like, hey, I think there's a better way to maybe tell the story or for us to design this thing?
Sure. Yeah, and that's a good way, is proposing it. I think it's important to, like I try to be very, like in a leadership position, just to go back one step, before I give the examples, to me, good, healthy leadership is more about shepherding rather than dictating. And it's more about like kind of just keeping people together and moving forward and proposing good things and trying to help people see like why this is a better thing without, making demands or being harsh about it. I think it's really important that we work in this way, out of respect for each other. And so usually whenever there's something that's concerning to me in a game, I try to approach it in this way. So one example was on Halo 4. Myself and a few other guys were starting to feel like the 3D model for Cortana and her outfit was starting to become a little bit sexualized, and out of the dignity for her as a woman, and honestly, really the elevation of her as a character, to not fall back on sex appeal, which is rather shallow. I think that we would all agree. We tried to push for like adjustments to her outfit that weren't so sexualized, and we tried to cite examples of, hey, if we made it a bit more stylized, then I think we might have broader appeal, and people wouldn't feel uncomfortable to play this game in their living room if there are younger kids around. And unfortunately, in that case, they decided to go with what they had. But again, it's proposing these alternatives and giving good reasons for why it's a healthier alternative, I think, is really important. So that one didn't quite work out so well. But I'm still happy that we were able to suggest that and to encourage those positive changes. And I'm hoping that maybe in the future, with the way certain things are going in society, and about how people are kind of waking up to this over-sexualization of a lot of things in our culture, especially with women, that we will maybe pull back from that. The other example is from Control, which was the last game that I worked on, that I was the lead designer of. And there was a part of the story where at one point, one of the iterations of it, the hero of the game solved the problem by committing suicide. And that was really upsetting to me for a number of reasons. One of them is because suicide in general seems to be very contagious, and it can often inspire other people or people who are kind of on the edge, to fall over the edge. And so this was really kind of upsetting to me, and I didn't want to romanticize the idea of suicide, or ever suggest it as a solution to a problem. And so I kind of sat down with Sam, the lead writer, and I just kind of said, hey, I have a lot of concerns about this. And I gave examples from the Netflix show 13 Reasons Why, which was about suicide, and it ended up inspiring a whole lot of suicides, they found out later. And I just said, I don't want to be a part of a project that there's even one suicide that is related to it. And he is such a gracious and humble guy. He immediately understood, and he agreed, and so he changed that part of the game. And I'm really happy that worked out. And again, it's not about me like forcing anything or imposing anything. It's about like, hey, let's sit down and talk through the concerns and find a solution together.
I mean, that's incredible to me, that there's a perfect example of two direct ways in which your Catholic faith and your formation of the faith led to, one, respecting the dignity of woman, which we know is huge from someone like St. John Paul II in the theology of the body, and number two, and the other example of really the dignity of human life, fostering, yet again, as St. John Paul II says, a culture of life, which is very much in need nowadays. So you could see how your Catholic faith immediately influenced, in one case, it at least made the industry cognizant of an issue that now society is starting to become more aware of, which is the unnecessary or abusive sexualization of the human person in general, but women in particular. And in the other case, it made them aware of the dignity of human life, and they actually changed the story plot of a major game. I mean, Control was not a little game, Again, that was one of the major games that was produced. And so that's inspirational to me.
Paul,
Holy Spirit.
Yeah, amen. Thank you for your yes. As we begin to wrap up the conversation, I want to just land with beauty. And again, as one who's been involved in design, you have to have an eye for like order and clarity and beauty. And can you just speak again about like how the Catholic thing, architecture, art, how that maybe has subconsciously or consciously made its way into your level designs, game designs, etc.?
Absolutely. So I've always been kind of blown away by the beauty that is found within, the Catholic churches, especially the older, more ancient churches. I actually wish we'd bring more of that back in our more modern churches. I'm sure a lot of people would agree on that note.
I second that motion.
Yes. And to me, it's I've talked in the past about this idea of a two-way street where we can see God in the beauty of the work, but by also the other direction, by understanding God, it inspires us to create more beauty. And so it's always kind of this exchange between seeing the beauty leading us to God, and then, pursuing God, which leads us back to beauty again. And so I had the very wonderful opportunity to go to Rome during the Jubilee year and got to see a whole lot of the most beautiful churches in the whole world, including St. Peter's Basilica, which has just literally changed my life. Being there is a very different feeling from seeing pictures of it. And seeing the work of these craftsmen and artisans, they literally devoted their lives, the work of their lives, to praising God through their work. And that is one of the most, that's, I think, the reason why that became so beautiful is because they were pursuing God and the truth of God, and they were worshiping God by producing this work. And that is just such an inspiration when you see everything in this architecture and the art. Everything has meaning. Every single thing has meaning and symbolism. And it's just so rich with this. And so I was so inspired with how these people from the past had really devoted their lives to this. And that really inspired me to put that same level of detail into the work that I do. In Christianity, the whole idea is not one of this kind of elevation beyond discomfort, which is what some, I think, false religions offers. Like, we'll make all your problems go away. Mm-hmm. But Christianity is kind of the inverse of that, where we say, God calls us to take up our cross and acknowledge our suffering and unite it to the suffering of Christ, because he did not deny that suffering. And so neither should we. We should, when we see an opportunity to make the world a better place and to sacrifice to do that, then we should do that. And so to me, that kind of shows itself in doing the work by making those sacrifices, by working a little bit harder, a little bit longer, to bring out that beauty out of a desire to share that joy and that beauty with other people. And so that's kind of how I see this, is it's an exchange between seeing the beauty of God and wanting to speak to that, and also making the sacrifice in order to bring that about, because you kind of can't do that if you're just kind of meh about things. If you're just going to like skate through, you're never going to achieve that level of detail and that beauty which really kind of points us to God.
It's the ancient concept of excellence.
Yes.
As Plato would say.
Yeah, this arete, the notion of there's the reason why we're attracted to the best athlete or attracted to the best singer is that they've taken a craft and really honed it to its nth degree. And that most certainly is the case in gaming as well. I mean, that's why, for me, one of my favorite games of all time is Skyrim. I've mentioned it multiple times in this series already, and I'll continue to do so probably the rest of my life. But I mean, Skyrim to me is really one of those games that's an example of a design studio that took things to the nth degree, and that's why it's such an admirable work. It's really the epitome of gaming excellence, if you will. It's all the soundtrack, the graphics, the storyline. Just it's epic in so many ways, and you see that, I believe, strewn throughout the gaming industry. This notion of a desire to acquire arete, to acquire excellence, and to manifest beauty. That is also why it's so attractive to millennials and Gen Z. I mean, there's an ache within their hearts for this sense of beauty and the transcendent, and this is the reason why they'll sit there and play this game for hours. I mean, they sense the excellence, even if it's something subconscious that they're not really aware of completely, it's there. And it's so prevalent in the way that they're gaming and the kind of games that they're attracted to.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, and that's, I mean, I look at so many other games and movies and music for inspiration because, God is very generous. God gives grace to everyone, all people, and often God gives grace to people that are rather surprising, to create these incredible works of art. Mozart is a famous example of somebody who was often seen as somebody that was rather vulgar, and yet God worked through him to bring about, these incredible works of symphony for masses, and the funeral mass that he did that's especially famous. And we see the same thing in video games as well. We can derive beauty. We can see the gifts that God is giving actively to all these different people, whether they happen to believe in God or not. He is still actively giving these gifts of grace to different people.
That's awesome. Paul, this has been an amazing conversation. Where can people go to learn more about your work?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm usually just buried in my work, so I'm not often around. But I guess I'm on Twitter at Bacon Sandwich. with no D somewhere out there.
That's awesome.
And yeah, I think I post on there every once in a while, but yeah, feel free to find me on there, send me a message, tell me about a cool game that you like. Yeah.
Well, I'm sure that after this interview, a lot of people will be interested in getting in touch with you as well, just to sort of discuss. I know there are a lot of gamers out there that would sympathize with some of the things that you shared and some of your experiences. And that's also one of the main focuses of this series and of Word on Fire's focus in this particular topic of video game and evangelization is what can we do to connect to gamers, especially those who are looking for deeper, more philosophical, theological, and just spiritual reasons for being. How can we connect them with one another? So I know that you would be a great resource for that. And we're just so grateful to God for you. Thank you for saying yes to your vocation within the video game industry, your vocation to holiness, to becoming a saint of the church, and just know that you're in our prayers, and we hope that we're in yours as well.
Thank you so much, Father Blake. You guys have been awesome, and it's been really nice just to talk about this stuff with people that care about it, so deeply. And it's sometimes it's rare to find people that have such passion like you guys do.
Thank you.
Amen. Well, thank you all for watching this production from the Word on Fire Institute. Stay tuned for more in the series. I'm Bobby Angel.
And I'm Father Blake Britton. God bless, and game on.